All right, welcome to the deep dive. We're tearing into another stack of sources you shared with us.
Yes, and this one looks really
It
significant.
really is foundational, I'd say, for understanding the tectonic plates shifting beneath Europe right now.
Mhm.
The topic, Germany's dramatic pivot towards remilitarization,
Yeah.
big stuff, and what that means for power dynamics across the continent.
Absolutely.
So our mission today is pretty clear. Let's unpack your material, find those gold nuggets of insight, and, get a handle on this massive change. Let's dive in.
Happy to. It's a topic the sources you provided make clear is, well, incredibly important and complex too.
Right.
Germany moving beyond its post-war defense posture isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet or, new tanks.
So,
It's about fundamentally redefining security relationships, capabilities in Europe, especially now with so much global uncertainty. Getting into the why and the how based on your research seems essential.
okay, so let's start there. This isn't the Germany we've known for decades, is it? The one famously, maybe notoriously hesitant on defense spending and military projection.
Not at all.
So what ignited this major shift, according to your sources? Why now?
Well, the catalyst, as your material really highlights, was the invasion of Ukraine. That was the shock.
Right, the Zeitenwende moment.
Exactly, the turning point.
Yeah.
In response, Berlin created something pretty unprecedented. The 100 billion Sondervermögen.
The special fund.
Yeah, a special fund just for defense modernization. This massive injection of cash, alongside increases in the regular budget, pushed Germany to finally hit NATO's long-sought 2% of GDP spending target in 2024.
Finally hitting 2%, that's huge.
It is a huge political and strategic marker after, well, years and years of debate.
Hitting that target for the first time, that's definitely a headline figure the source really emphasizes. But you flagged a potential problem looking just beyond that 100 billion boost, didn't you?
I did, and the sources are very clear on this. While the special fund is transformative now, it's temporary. It's set to run out.
When?
The projection is it'll be exhausted after 2027. And Germany's regular defense budget right now sits near 53 billion.
Okay.
So once the Sondervermögen's gone, just maintaining that 2% level would mean finding an extra 30 billion every year.
Wow, 30 billion annually.
Yeah, that's a significant fiscal cliff they'll face unless, the regular budget gets a permanent, substantial increase.
A 30 billion gap just a few years down the line. That's definitely a core insight from your sources about the long-term viability of this whole pivot.
It really is.
But right now, fueled by that 100 billion, the sources detail a huge shopping spree for the Bundeswehr. What kind of new hardware are we talking about coming online?
Oh, it's a comprehensive modernization wave. It's hitting air, land, and air defense pretty much across the board.
Like what specifically?
Your sources list major orders,
Yeah.
like 35 F-35A fighter jets, first delivery expected in 2026.
Okay, the F-35s.
Then on the ground, they're getting state-of-the-art Leopard 2A8 tanks and modernizing their Puma infantry fighting vehicles.
Right, the Pumas needed that.
They did. And for heavy lift, they're going for CH-47F Chinook helicopters.
Chinooks, okay.
And crucially, for air defense, they're buying layers of systems. Iris-T, Patriot, and even the long-range Arrow 4.
Arrow 4, that's the Israeli system.
Yes, particularly under the German-led European Sky Shield Initiative, ESI for short.
ESI got it. So they're getting the kit, loads of it,
Yeah.
but you need the people to operate it all.
Exactly.
The sources mention personnel as a major hurdle. How big is that challenge?
It's substantial, really substantial. According to your material, the Bundeswehr needs to grow by somewhere between 35,000 and 75,000 troops.
35 to 75,000, that's a massive range, but either end is huge.
It is a massive recruitment and retention effort needed there. And it's not just raw numbers. They have a specific requirement from NATO
Which is?
to prepare and fully equip 2 combat divisions for the Alliance's new 300,000 troop high readiness force.
2 full divisions. That's a big ask.
It is. And the sources note the timelines for getting these divisions fully ready and equipped are, well, they're currently slipping, probably into the late 2020s.
And you mentioned something else about personnel.
Yes, you're right. The possibility of bringing back conscription. It's explicitly mentioned in the source material as being back on the table for discussion in Germany.
Wow, okay. Conscription back on the table.
Huh.
So you have this internal German drive to rearm, powered by the special fund, but facing this future fiscal question mark and these big personnel challenges. But your sources also introduce a really striking external factor, a potential shock scenario, they call it, involving the United States.
Yes, and here's where it gets really interesting. It puts Germany's whole pivot into a much broader context.
How so?
Your sources discuss the possibility of well, a significant shift in the U.S. security posture in Europe,
A shift how? Like pulling back?
potentially. Washington's NATO envoy is cited, confirming that discussions are indeed planned. They're talking about potentially pulling large U.S. formations out of Europe after the June 2025 NATO summit.
Pulling large formations out after June 2025.
That's what the sources indicate is being discussed.
Right.
Now, they're careful to say this isn't about the U.S. leaving NATO altogether.
Right, not leaving the alliance.
No, but the practical implications of pulling out large formations, they're profound.
And what would that withdrawal look like in concrete terms based on your research? What would actually leave?
Well, a pullout of large U.S. formations could mean removing around 60,000 U.S. troops currently stationed in Europe.
60,000.
And critically, it would likely involve removing the U.S. dual-capable aircraft, the ones that support NATO's B-61 nuclear stockpile based on the continent.
Taking the nuclear umbrella, or at least part of it, away.
That's the implication. And perhaps less visible, but just as vital, it would take away much of the logistics backbone.
Logistics? Like,
Things like heavy transport, satellite communications, command and control structures, the stuff many European armies really rely on for large-scale operations. It's a scenario that creates a massive potential void.
Okay, so Germany is building up its military muscle, getting all this new kit.
Right.
And there's this potential scenario where the U.S. steps back significantly, leaving a gap.
Exactly.
This is where your sources pivot to analyzing the shifting landscape within Europe itself. They call this the axis of competition. What does that phrase from the sources mean in this context?
That language, axis of competition, it reflects the understanding in your sources that this isn't just about individual countries getting stronger in isolation.
Okay.
It's about how their relative power and their influence within Europe are changing, how they might compete or maybe coordinate in new ways. It looks at the net effect of a remilitarized Germany operating in a potentially less U.S.-dependent security environment.
Right, the ripple effects. Let's break down that shifting power. First up, conventional military strength. What do your sources predict for Germany's military hardware, say, by 2028?
The sources project that by 2028, thanks to this big procurement wave we talked about.
Yeah, the F-35s, Leopards.
Exactly. The Bundeswehr is expected to field the largest collection of modern armored vehicles and air assets west of the Vistula River.
Wow, the largest west of the Vistula. That's a significant claim. How does that compare to other major European players, like France or the UK?
Your sources note this capability would effectively overtake France in conventional terms and match the conventional land and air power of the UK.
Overtake France, match the UK.
Yes. This positions Germany, and this is a quote from a source, as the indispensable first responder for conventional crises stretching from the Baltic Sea down to the Alps.
Indispensable first responder. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier the potential removal of U.S. dual-capable aircraft and their role with the B-61 nuclear bombs. If that happens, the elephant in the room is obviously nuclear deterrence. What critical decision does that scenario force upon Germany, according to your sources? It forces Germany to confront a truly fundamental question about its ultimate security guarantee, a question they haven't had to face quite this starkly before.
Which is?
The sources highlight that discussions are already happening openly in both Paris and London about two primary options.
Okay, what are they?
Option 1. Germany formally accepts security under a French or British extended nuclear umbrella.
Relying on Paris or London for the nuclear deterrent.
Correct. Option 2. Berlin faces the, and again this phrasing's from the source, the once taboo debate about potentially developing its own independent nuclear deterrent capability. Its own nuclear weapons, that is taboo.
A truly dramatic choice with huge historical and political implications.
Let's look at the traditional heart of the EU engine, Germany and France. How does this military rebalancing affect their dynamic?
Your sources suggest a pretty nuanced shift. It's not straightforward. Well, Paris obviously retains its nuclear weapons and its global force projection capabilities, things Germany still lacks.
Right.
But Berlin now pairs the EU's largest economy with what's becoming its heftiest conventional army.
Economy plus army.
Exactly. The material predicts this will lead to more co-leadership on European defense issues. They'll have to work together.
That's always a but.
But also potentially deeper rivalry. The sources point to friction points.
Like what?
Disagreements over military doctrines, how wars should be fought. Competition in the arms industry, a big one. Whose tanks or fighters does Europe buy?
Yeah.
German ones, French ones, joint ones,
Right, the industrial competition.
and even friction over how they approach operations in regions like Africa or the Middle East and North Africa, where they sometimes have different interests.
Okay, so co-leadership, but with added friction. What about countries on the eastern flank? Those, with direct exposure to Russia or maybe historical anxieties about German military power. How are they reacting based on your sources?
That's a really critical question. Countries like Poland are responding, in part, with their own massive defense spending.
Yeah, Poland's spending is huge.
Your sources highlight Poland's commitment, 4.7% of GDP. That's one of the highest in NATO.
Wow.
Warsaw generally welcomes the increase in German military capability and the availability of German equipment. They want strong allies.
Makes sense.
But, according to the sources, they want concrete reassurances. They're looking for hard guarantees.
What kind of guarantees?
Like permanently forward-deployed German brigades on their soil and German air defense coverage. Things to offset those deep-seated historical anxieties.
Understandable. And the Baltics.
Nordics.
Smaller Baltic and Nordic states are also rapidly increasing their defense budgets. Your sources note countries like the Netherlands and Sweden pledging significant amounts, potentially up to 5% of GDP in some cases. They're fast-tracking their own rearmament alongside Germany's buildup. Everyone feels the pressure. Everyone's rearming. Okay, and the UK. A major military power, nuclear-armed, but now outside the EU. Where does it fit into this evolving European picture described in your sources?
London remains a crucial player, no doubt. They have the nuclear deterrent, and as the sources point out, the only European navy capable of escorting Atlantic convoys. That's vital.
Things Germany isn't doing.
Exactly, capabilities Germany isn't pursuing. However, your sources suggest that because the UK is outside the EU's integrating defense structures, it risks becoming a swing rather than core player.
A swing player, meaning?
Meaning influential, but maybe not central to the day-to-day decision-making on continental defense in the same way as, say, Germany or France within the EU framework might become.
So what should London do, according to the sources?
To maintain its influence and relevance in continental security, the material indicates London will need to deepen its bilateral security accords, like its existing Lancaster House treaties with France, and crucially, build strong bilateral ties, particularly with the now more modular Berlin.
Okay, makes sense. Now, does a stronger Germany help or hinder the broader goal of greater EU-level defense integration? We hear a lot about European strategic autonomy.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword based on what your sources say.
How so?
On the one hand, German military capabilities, especially those two heavy divisions they're meant to provide for NATO,
Yeah.
they certainly give credibility to the idea of an EU-level rapid deployment capacity.
Yeah.
Makes it seem more achievable.
Right. Gives it teeth.
Exactly. And Germany's political weight, plus its willingness to put money into initiatives like the European Defense Fund, EDF, or PESCO, or SE.
The Sky Shield?
Yes. That's a significant driver for integration. Germany is putting its money where its mouth is, to some extent.
That's just however.
However, the sources also note definite concern, particularly among countries like Italy and France, about what they term Germanization.
Germanization.
Essentially, the fear that German standards, German equipment choices, German supply chains could come to dominate the EU's collective defense framework.
Ah, so potentially marginalizing other national industries or military approaches.
Precisely. It's a sensitive point about who sets the standards and who benefits industrially.
That leads us directly into the economic and industrial side of this. What does this massive German defense push mean for the defense industry across Europe? Who wins, who loses?
Well, Germany's push for common procurement on major next-generation projects is key here.
Like the future tank and fighter jet?
Exactly. Think ESSI for air defense, the planned Main Ground Combat System MGCS for tanks, and the Future Combat Air System FCAS for combat aircraft. These big Franco-German-Spanish projects.
Okay.
If these go ahead and Germany is a major buyer, it could really anchor Europe's defense technology ecosystem. It would likely solidify the position of major European firms like Rheinmetall, Hensoldt, and the defense divisions of Airbus.
So good for European giants.
Potentially, yes.
Right.
But on the flip side, countries that choose to buy primarily U.S. equipment.
Like the F-35s Germany is buying, or Patriots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
While they gain interoperability with the U.S. military, which is valuable, they simultaneously increase their industrial dependence on Washington. This could, the sources argue, potentially weaken the overall European defense industrial base in the long run. It's a trade-off.
Dependence versus interoperability. Okay. Now, with such big, rapid changes, there's always the potential for things to go wrong. What are the key strategic risks and friction points your sources highlight as Germany remilitarizes?
Your sources identify four pretty significant risks that planners really need to watch closely.
Okay, let's hear them. Number one.
First, and we touched on this earlier, it's fiscal sustainability, that 30 billion question mark.
Right, after 2027.
Yes. If Germany doesn't find a way to embed a permanent increase in its regular defense budget before that 100 billion special fund runs out, the whole force modernization effort could just stall.
And the impact.
It would severely undermine Germany's credibility. All these plans, all this equipment, if the long-term funding isn't there, it leaves Germany and potentially Europe exposed.
So that fiscal gap isn't just a number on a spreadsheet, it's a potential credibility killer. Got it. What's the second risk?
Second is alliance cohesion. NATO cohesion, EU cohesion.
How could that be risked?
Well, if Berlin were to become too unilateral in its approach, maybe pushing too hard for an EU-only command structure, or prioritizing EU defense initiatives over NATO in a way that alienates non-EU allies.
Like the UK or maybe Turkey.
Or even Eastern European allies who deeply value the NATO link to the U.S. If they feel Berlin is sidelining NATO, or if they worry about losing that U.S. security blanket without a solid replacement,
What might they do?
they might hedge their bets. Double down on separate bilateral security guarantees, perhaps directly with the U.S. or the U.K.,
Which could lead to.
potentially splintering the collective deterrence effort across the continent. You'd have different security blocks emerging, which could be dangerous.
That fragmentation risk is a powerful insight from your sources. Okay, the third pitfall.
A potential nuclear gap. This ties back to the U.S. withdrawal scenario and the B-61s. Your sources warn that Europe could end up in a tricky situation. Strong conventional military forces, perhaps anchored by Germany's buildup, but with an ambiguous or insufficient nuclear backstop.
If the U.S. steps back and Europe doesn't sort out the French-UK umbrella,
Exactly. If the U.S. nuclear presence recedes and Europe doesn't clearly establish a credible alternative, whether it's that formalized umbrella or some other NATO-EU sharing mechanism, well, an unclear nuclear deterrent is destabilizing.
how so?
The sources argue it could potentially invite revisionist brinkmanship from adversaries. They might test the boundaries if they perceive weakness or ambiguity at the nuclear level.
A very serious risk. And finally, the fourth risk touches on Germany's complex history, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Historical sensitivities. This is crucial.
Explain.
Even with the best intentions, even if it's all framed as collective security, a significantly more powerful German army operating again in the heart of Europe could, understandably, revive latent fears.
And which countries particularly?
Perhaps particularly in some neighboring countries in Southern and Eastern Europe, maybe even France to some extent, given the 20th century.
So what's the implication for Germany?
It means Germany's growing military power needs to be managed with extreme diplomatic care. It must be integrated within genuinely joint frameworks, NATO structures, EU battle groups, permanent bilateral agreements.
Not just German forces operating alone.
Definitely not. It needs to be perceived as a shared European capability, not a unilateral German one. Building and maintaining trust will be absolutely paramount. That diplomatic piece is as important as the hardware.
That makes perfect sense. Now, your sources don't just lay out the current situation and these risks. They actually provide a potential timeline, a kind of most likely trajectory for how this might play out over the next decade or so, from 2025 to 2035.
They do, yes. It's quite detailed.
Can you walk us through that predicted path? What are the phases?
Absolutely. The sources break it down into roughly three phases. First, the near term, 2025 to 2027.
What happens then?
This is where you see the immediate impact of the current plans. The Bundeswehr hits that 2% GDP target, as we discussed. Right. Germany receives its first F-35s. The Aero 4 air defense order under ESI is finalized. Big procurement milestones hit.
And the U.S. role in this phase?
During this period, the sources project the U.S. will likely begin reducing some of its European formations, but probably not a complete pullout of large core structures just yet. More of a drawdown.
And the EU?
The EU also finalizes key initiatives mentioned in the sources, like the European Sky Shield details and plans for joint munitions procurement to refill stocks.
Okay, so initial buildup, early U.S. adjustments, EU planning solidifies. What's projected for the next phase, 2028 to 2031?
Okay, this period, 2028-2031, is flagged as really critical. Why? Because the Sondervermögen, the special fund, is projected to be exhausted.
The fiscal cliff arrives.
Exactly. The sources forecast that Berlin will face a very difficult, very political decision.
Which is
Either raise taxes or significantly increase national debt to embed that higher defense spending permanently, keeping it at 2% or more. Or face trimming back some of the ambitious modernization programs. Hard choices.
And geopolitically in this phase.
The sources predict a Franco-German treaty on extended nuclear deterrence could be signed. A formal agreement.
With Poland involved.
Perhaps with Poland gaining some form of observer status, according to the source material. That would be significant.
And German troops abroad.
Yes. Notably, the sources project 2 German brigades being permanently stationed forward, one in Lithuania, one perhaps in Slovakia, as a concrete demonstration of commitment to the eastern flank.
Permanent forward presence. That would be a major signal indeed. Okay, and finally, looking further out to 2032 to 2035.
Right, the longer view. If, and it's big, if that crucial funding is sustained through the tricky 2028-2031 phase.
If they solve the fiscal cliff.
Yes. Then the sources project Germany fielding a fully capable high-readiness Division 35 Corps.
Division 35.
Essentially, a rapidly deployable heavy ground force. This would provide Europe with a robust, non-U.S. rapid reaction force capability for the first time, really.
A European core force anchored by Germany.
That's the idea. And the sources also anticipate NATO itself potentially evolving during this time, maybe into more of a dual-pillar structure.
Dual pillar.
Meaning a Euro core, likely anchored by Germany and France, working alongside, or perhaps sometimes independently of, a transatlantic pillar led by the U.S. and the U.K. A more balanced alliance, perhaps.
That timeline provides a really specific, maybe even provocative vision of how this future European security architecture might actually form.
It does. It lays out one potential pathway based on current trends and decisions.
So, given all these complex insights, the buildup, the risks, the timeline, what are the absolute key takeaways? The main recommendations your sources offer for planners, policymakers, anyone thinking about European security. What's the ultimate so what from all this?
Your sources really boil it down to 5 critical recommendations.
Right.
Actionable points.
Okay, let's have them.
Yeah.
1.
First, they stress the need to anchor German power firmly in multilateral formats. We talked about this regarding historical sensitivities.
NATO, EU.
Yes. NATO structures, EU battle groups, multinational core. This isn't just about military efficiency. It's politically vital to reassure neighbors and prevent the reemergence of anxieties about German dominance. Keep it collective.
Keep it collective. Got it. What's number 2?
Second, close the potential nuclear loophole. That ambiguity we discussed, created by a possible U.S. withdrawal scenario, it must be addressed head-on.
How?
Either by formally clarifying and operationalizing a Franco-British nuclear umbrella over the continent, or perhaps by devising some new NATO-EU sharing mechanism. Leaving this undefined is a strategic vulnerability that needs fixing.
Right, clarity is key there. And getting back to that fiscal challenge one more time.
Absolutely critical. Recommendation 3, match the money to the promises. Germany must find a way to embed a permanent, sustainable defense budget increase before 2028.
Non-negotiable.
Pretty much. Without this, the current momentum just dies on the vine, and the entire strategic shift loses credibility. Promises need funding.
Makes sense. 4th recommendation.
Number 4 is about efficiency. Interoperate, don't duplicate.
Meaning?
Initiatives like Germany's ESSI, the Sky Shield, are valuable, but they make the most strategic sense when they're designed from the outset to seamlessly integrate with and complement other European capabilities.
Like French or Italian systems.
Exactly. Layering German systems with, say, French after or SMPT missile defenses or Italian space-based surveillance assets. Avoid building expensive, redundant national systems that can't easily talk to each other. Pool resources effectively.
Smart. And finally, the role of the UK, number 5.
Number 5. Engage the UK early and deeply. Don't let Brexit create unnecessary security gaps.
Oh.
Leverage Britain's unique capability, things like their carrier strike groups, their attack submarines, SSNs, particularly for securing the vital Atlantic and Arctic maritime routes.
Let the UK handle the maritime flank.
In part. This allows Germany to focus its growing conventional power more squarely on the continental land and air challenges. It creates a potentially complementary division of labor, even outside the formal EU structures. Requires deliberate effort, though.
Okay, 5 key takeaways there. Now, bringing all these threads together, the German rearmament, the potential U.S. shift, the internal European rebalancing, the risks, the potential future path. What is the single biggest conclusion your sources draw? What's the headline about the remilitarized Germany's potential impact?
The core conclusion, the bottom line in your material seems to be this. A remilitarized Germany, if and these are crucial ifs, if its spending is sustained beyond that special fund, and if its military power is genuinely integrated and politically Europeanized.
Rather than pursued unilaterally.
Exactly. If those conditions are met, it would fundamentally shift the conventional power center of the continent.
Shift it from where to where?
It would move away from being so heavily reliant on the traditional transatlantic axis dominated by the U.S. towards being anchored more firmly in kind of Berlin-Paris-Warsaw triangle, a more European core.
A Berlin-Paris-Warsaw triangle. That's a truly seismic reorientation outlined in your sources. Moving from a Germany deeply hesitant about military strength for decades to one potentially anchoring a new core of European defense capabilities.
It is seismic. And the sources, interestingly, leave us with a crucial final thought on this.
Which is?
Whether this newfound German military power ultimately acts as a stabilizer for Europe, or conversely, becomes a source of friction and potentially fragments European security. Well, it depends less on the sheer amount of firepower Germany acquires, less on the number of tanks and jets.
And more on what?
It depends far more on how deftly Berlin manages to turn its new military muscle into a force for genuinely shared security. Embedded within trusted alliances, respecting partners, building consensus, that diplomatic and political effort is just as critical, maybe even more critical, than the procurement lists themselves.
Turning muscle into shared security, not solitary strength. That leaves us with a lot to think about, pulling directly from the insights you provided in your sources.
Indeed.
So here is the provocative thought, based on everything we've unpacked from your material, for you to mull over until next time. Given those historical sensitivities and the absolute need for multilateral trust that your sources highlight, how might Germany best navigate this path? How can it ensure its newfound military strength is genuinely perceived and used for shared security across Europe and not, consciously or unconsciously, seen as a return to national dominance?